welcome to Pot Up with Matthews in the Morning from the Crime Prevention Security System Studios. Large enough to serve you, small enough to care. Hope everyone had a great weekend. We got a good show lined up for you today. We're going to be joined here in just a second by the voice of the Florida Gators, Mick, Hubert. Second portion of the show, we'll be joined by Orlando Sentinels, Matt Murschel. But let's get straight to the Titan MR hotline. And we're joined by the voice of the Gators, as I mentioned, Mick Hubert. Good morning, Mick. How are you? Can you hear me, Mick?
I got you, Shane, yeah.
There he is. How you doing during this quarantine, my man, during this pandemic?
You know, I really didn't have too many issues. We don't know how long it's going to go. And March was fairly simple, and April, May, and June, really. I mean, it is what it is. But I will tell you, here in July, I've started to get a little different feeling. I think it's a feeling of anxiousness.
Absolutely.
People ask me all along, we got to have a football season. Well, can you tell me we're going to have one? And I keep saying, well, I'm always optimistic. I've been optimistic right from the get-go, from day one, and I still have that optimism. But as it gets closer and closer, that's when you get a little more anxiety, I guess, because I think we'll probably know here in the next week or so what the plans are. But for me, I've used it to get in 10,000 steps every day. I think I got 130 some in a row going. We got back, Shane, from the SEC tournament in basketball. It was so crazy because we went up there. I'm not sure what day it was. I think it was a Wednesday. And it was a Wednesday, the 11th. Because I had done a baseball game. I had done the Gators and FSU. Florida was number one in the country at 16-0, and had beaten FSU, I don't know, 28 out of 30, somewhere in that vicinity. And lo and behold, the Seminoles come into McKeithen Stadium and beat the Gators in what would be the last game played in that ballpark. And so the Gators, after that game, were 16-1. And that was the last game that I did. And so the next morning, I went up to Nashville for the SEC basketball tournament and went to shoot around the practice on that. And we had a staff dinner on Wednesday night, and things were rapidly changing. That was when Rudy Gobert got initially announced as being the first coronavirus victim. And we had a staff dinner, so it was about an hour and a half, 2 hours long, probably. In that course of 2 hours, though, it seemed like the whole world went upside down. The events were rapidly occurring every 5 minutes. And we walked there with a little bit of, we walked in Nashville, probably 6 or 8 blocks to the restaurant. And, there were still a lot of people on the streets, anticipation, because they were playing 2 games that night. The first 2 games of the tournament were being played. And a lot of questions and curiosity. As we walked back, it was like this sense of loss on our faces, like, oh my goodness. Having said all that, I go to bed that night and get up next morning, and I interviewed Coach Mike White for the pregame show. And he says to me, Mick, he said, I couldn't really sleep last night. I said, Zach, I said, that ain't different than any other night. You're a coach. You guys never sleep. He goes, yeah, I don't know that we're going to play today. I go, what? Oh, we're going to play. There's not going to be any fans there. That's going to be different. Probably be able to hear me at press row, out on the court. That'll be a little strange, but we'll play. So we did the pregame interview, and we're in breakfast, and some of the guys had finished, and they'd left. Some of the guys go back toward their room. And then about 5 minutes later, they got the official text, I guess it was, the term was called off. They had to go back and get the guys and bring them back into the room. So we had probably 35 people in that room, and it was eerie. It was really strange that, Mike had to make that announcement that no game tonight and no game this weekend and probably no games. We don't know when. And so we got back that night, and the next day was Friday the 13th. So that's when I went out and I said, well, I'll go get some steps in. And so I walked around the neighborhood, 10,000 steps or more, I guess I got that day. And I thought, you know what, that's what I can do. I can do this every day. I certainly can afford to lose a few pounds, so I will do that. And I've been doing it every day, Shane, since March 13th. I haven't got them in yet today, but as soon as we get done, I'll go out there and do it. So I have been optimistic through all of this, that we will play. And I remain optimistic that while this season will be a strange one, we don't know the effects and how it's going to play out. I believe that we will have a season, and hopefully the basketball season will be uninterrupted or will start on time. And I'm like everybody else, hopefully sooner than later, we can get back the way we once knew it. certainly think that will happen, but I don't know what's going to happen in the next couple of months. So that's where we're all in this limbo land still again.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Mick, I want to go back. When I have, you're a media guy, but you're also kind of a athlete, coach, celebrity type. When I have them first on my show, I like to go back to their younger days. Illinois State Redbird. Did you always grow up wanting to be a broadcaster?
Shane, I did. Initially, I'm talking probably 7 or 8 years old. The thought was maybe be a coach or a broadcaster. But the coach thing, it was just kind of a thought. I never really had any deep pursuing of that at all. I was a broadcaster. I grew up in the Chicago area, and back in those days, I think Chicago was still the number 2 market. I think it's been surpassed by LA now, but it's the top 3 market. And so what I realized was that I was getting rid of the cream of the crop of broadcasters. I mean, these were guys, these were big time guys. I mean, when I was in high school, there was a very young TV sportscaster at Channel 2 in Chicago, WBBM TV in Chicago, by the name of Brent Musburger. So I watched Brent Musburger do the sports when he was a local guy, and I watched also Greg Gumbel do the sports in Chicago, and he was just a local guy. And but I was always listening to the radio. You know, I had a little transistor radio at night, and I would put that under my pillow and go to sleep and wake up. And one of 2 things would happen in the morning. Either I had static coming in my ear because the station, I couldn't get it anymore. And that's one thing about growing up in the Midwest. You can get radio stations from probably 30 or 35 states. I mean, I'd listen to baseball broadcasts from all over, of course, only during the night. And then once the sun came up, those radio waves, they disappeared. So I'd either have static or I'd have nothing because the transistor radio batteries had gone dead. Mm-hmm. So I always had this fascination of being a broadcaster. And growing up listening to Jack Brickhouse do the Cubs and Harry Carey I could hear Harry Carey in St. Louis doing the Cardinals on KMOX. That would get up into northern Illinois where I grew up. And so I could hear Harry Carey, and then he came to Chicago and did the White Sox, then he did the Cubs. And Jim Durham was a guy that I knew when he was the voice of the Chicago Bulls from 1973 to 1991, 18 years, and did the first of the NBA Michael Jordan Bulls championships. And I had a valuable lesson about that too, because after his 91 season, Jim had been there 18 years, and his contract came up, and he had a person representing him in the negotiation, and the negotiation failed. And subsequently, Jim Durham got fired after 18 years of voice of the Bulls. He went to Dallas and became the voice of the Dallas Mavericks. But I thought, wow, they could fire Jim Durham after 18 years at an NBA World Championship. You better watch your P's and Q's, in terms of trying to negotiate contracts. So I was thinking that when I was way young in my career. But so I had this background of listening to these sportscasters, and they were very good ones. And then when I went to school at Illinois State, I had 2 buddies there that were older than me. They were my mentors. One was about 5 or 6 years older. Another guy was about 20 years older. And they were agreeable to let me bring them my tapes, and they would critique me. And so I learned that very early on, that you have to have a very thick skin in this business, that you have to be able to take criticism, and the criticism is not personal, it's all professional. And a lot of people can't take that. And so I learned to take that criticism. And after a couple of years, this one younger guy went out to Ventura, California, a suburb of Los Angeles, and he started sending me cassette tapes back in 1976, 77 of the Los Angeles Rams on KMPC radio. And the play-by-play broadcaster was Dick Enberg. So I started listening to a lot of Dick Enberg stuff, and that's where I got the Oh My. And I started using that when I was in Peoria. It was my first job out of college. In Peoria, I was doing the Bradley Braves basketball. And I started throwing that in there, and then I brought it to Dayton, and I brought it obviously here to Florida. But so all the while I was a little kid, the people, basically my family and whatnot would say, if you're going to be a sportscaster, you have to have a phrase. You have to have a catchphrase. I mean, Jack Brickhouse had, hey, hey, whenever the Cubs hit a home run, he'd go, hey, hey, and they'd put it on the screen, the words that flash, hey, hey, they'd be flashing back and forth. And then, of course, holy cow from Harry Carey. And so, that was in the back of my mind. So then when I heard, oh my, I thought, that's it. That's it. That'll work for me. So that's how that came about. But all the while I was, 9, 10, 11, my teenage years, I would be always being a broadcaster and doing that. So that's really what I pursued, and got my degree in communications with a minor in journalism. So it's been a great career. I guess 31 years at Florida and 13 before. I had 3 in Peoria and 10 in Dayton. So 44 years of broadcasting, and so it's been pretty good. It's been a lot of fun. I'm very fortunate to be around a lot of good players like yourself, good athletes, good coaches, good teams, and been very fortunate too, Shane, as a broadcaster, to have only lived in 3 cities. Broadcasting kind of a nomad life. So you could move around every 2 or 3 years if you want, and I've moved just 3 times in 44 years. So I've been very.
I was going to ask you, as you mentioned, you got your start with the Bradley Braves and the Dayton Flyers. How did the Florida job, how did they come after you? Did you just apply, come down here and interview? How did all that transpire?
Well, I was very blessed, very fortunate. Back in the middle 1980s, when I was in Dayton, there was a guy over at Wittenberg University, a little Division III school in Springfield, Ohio, that had worked with the NCAA. So he had NCAA contacts. And then the athletic director at Miami of Ohio in Oxford, Ohio, a guy by the name of Dick Schreider, was on the NCAA Division I men's basketball selection committee. And Dayton was a market that's where they got their TV in Oxford. He could see me on TV every night, and he knew I was doing the Dayton Flyers. So he said, Mick, I'm going to submit your name. We don't have anybody in Southwestern Ohio that's broadcasting. This was before CBS got the contract. So the NCAA Productions, which was an arm of the NCAA, they were doing these early first and second round games before it went to the networks. So that happened. And then a guy by the name of Tom Frericks was the athletic director at the University of Dayton. He succeeded Dick Schreider on the selection committee. So these 3 gentlemen, they really got me into the NCAA. So about 1985, I got a call to do it was early March, to do the NCAA basketball tournament. And they were going to call me Sunday night at 11 o'clock Eastern time, because the selection show had been on at 6 o'clock. And so actually they were going to call me about 10 o'clock. And so I was all nervous. I watched the pairings, I watched all that. About 10 o'clock, the call didn't come. About 10:15, call didn't come. 10:30, call didn't come. And I'm thinking, I'm sure he said 10 o'clock. About 11 o'clock, he called a guy by the name of Dave Kaywood, who worked for the NCAA in communications department. He called, he said, Mick, he says, I'm very sorry. He said, you are all set to go. I was obviously low man on the totem pole, but he said, CBS came in and took a couple more games, like Thursday night games, and we've had to juggle some announcers, and we don't have any games for you to do. Well, I was devastated, really kind of heartbroken. That was in March. But he said, we like you and we want to continue to work with you. So just be patient, hang in there, famous last words. So it got to be about Thanksgiving. He called me back. He said, Mick, we have the Division III NCAA football championship game, the Amos Alonzo Stag Bowl, played in Phoenix City, Alabama. And it's Division III national championship. We would like you to do that game. Well, I said, great. And that game was picked up by TBS. So in essence, it was national television, national cable television. And I worked a game with Steve Davis, who was the quarterback at Oklahoma, ran the Oklahoma Wishbone and Barry Switzer in the 70s. Steve Davis. He was also an ABC analyst for one of the regional networks for ABC. So, and I remember vividly, I went down there on a Thursday, and I met Steve, and he was a nice guy. He was, he was a bigger time guy than me. I'm a rookie doing the game, and we had a good time. And Saturday morning, I woke up, we had breakfast. I said, Steve, I said, well, today's the big day. He looked at me and said, Mick, if this is the big day for you, you haven't arrived yet. It was a big day for me. It was a national championship game on TBS, but for him, it was just another game, So we did the game, and then I think the next year they brought me back, and I worked with Bill Curry, who had been at Alabama, and then he was at Georgia Tech, and I worked with him. He was a wonderful gentleman. He was a great guy. Bill Curry was a great guy. And then I ended up working with Homer Rice, who now was the director of athletics at Georgia Tech. But I knew Homer when he was the head coach of the Cincinnati Bengals. I'll never forget the last game the Bengals played, and they got beat at the old Riverfront Stadium. And it was cold. He looked like Columbo. He had his old trench coat on. He walked off the field. He pretty much knew it was over. And the next day they fired him. They were 4-12. But he was a great, great guy. Oh my goodness, he was a great man. And he said, Nick, if I can ever help you in your career, you let me know. So that was in December, probably about, I guess it would have been 88, I think it was. And so sure enough, the Florida job. Now, after I got ahead of my story, because after I did that first Stag Bowl game, the next, that was December, 4 months later in March, then they used me for the NCAA basketball tournament. I did about 5 years of the Stag Bowl and about 5 years of the NCAA basketball tournament. So I had that. I think that was really, that was as much instrumental in me getting the Gators job as any. Now, there were 150 tapes, 150 applicants, and, obviously they liked the quality of the work on the tape, but they also know, hey, this guy had worked for the NCAA and he's done NCAA basketball and been on TBS and all that stuff. And so it kind of gave me a leg up. So I really owe it to all those guys that got me going with that. But anyway, 4 months after I did the last Stag Bowl game, the Gators job opened up. And a friend of mine, a guy by the name of Bruce Asbury, who I'd worked with in Peoria, Illinois, grew up in Paris, Kentucky, big Kentucky fan. And so him and I used to sit out in the car on Monday nights and listen to Kaywood Ledford do the Kentucky Wildcats on WHAS in Louisville. We'd have the heater on, it was cold in Peoria in wintertime. Go out there and listen to the game. So that was kind of an introduction to listening to the SEC and all of that. And lo and behold, I get a job after Peoria in Dayton. And a few months later, Bruce Asbury gets his job with me in Dayton. That's very rare you'd work with the same guy in two different markets. So I'd known Bruce for many years, great sports fan. And he brought in a broadcasting magazine. I don't even know if they print broadcasting magazine anymore, but broadcasting magazine. In the back of the magazine, they had the want ads, and they had ads for sportscasting jobs and all broadcasting jobs. And so he comes in, he goes, Mick, he says, there's a job at Florida. You got to apply. You can get that job. I'd been in Dayton about 9-10 years at that point. I said, Bruce, they're not going to hire me. They're not going to hire a guy from Ohio, they're going to hire somebody down there. I didn't go to the University of Florida. Well, you got to send a tape. So I sent a tape down, turned out to 150 of them. And after that was about, I'd worked the NCAA tournament, which was in Indianapolis, the first and second round. And we had 44,000 people there. And the game that I was in the next year, I believe the next year, the Final Four was going there. So this was kind of a dry run, a test run. That was the most people I'd ever broadcast a basketball game in front of, 44,000. And the game was between Kansas State and Xavier. Well, I got two games that day, but one of them is this particular game. Well, during the shoot around for that Kansas State shoot around, I'm over there talking to the coach on the side of the corner of the court. And, he's asking me about Florida. I keep asking about K-State. I keep asking about his team. He keeps asking me about Florida. Turned out the guy was Lon Kruger. And Lon Kruger was already in talks with Florida to come to Florida. I didn't know that. Well, Xavier beat K-State, so that was Lon's last game. And so, and I remember telling Lon, I said, Lon, this is my first year at Florida. It's a great place. I mean, it's probably more dynamic for football. I mean, we had Emmitt Smith still here that year, and the year before that, they had won the SEC basketball championship. But, that next year, that's when things went south with, I was actually here when Galen was fired and Norm was fired, and then Don DeVoe came in, and we had a disastrous season. But I remember saying, I said, they just won the SEC basketball championship, and then basketball is going to be good there. We're going to get a good coach, and it's really going to be good. I'm very excited about the future of Florida basketball. And little did I realize I'm talking to the future head coach of the Gators, and I walked into the old Gator room, for the news conference, and my heart was pounding. I'm thinking, oh Lord, I'm so glad. I could have said, Shane, you can fire a gun in the O'Connell Center, not hit anybody. There's nobody there. We lost 13. That year with Don DeVoe as the interim coach, we were miserable, and we went to the Freedom Bowl in football, with the interim situation there. So it didn't look that great for athletics in Florida in 1989 year. But it turned out that all because I was working with the NCAA, it turned out I got this job, and then happened to be in contact with Lon, and then it just kind of all fell in place. But that's kind of how it started. And David Steele, he called me. David Steele was the voice of the Gators for about 7 years and was going to be the new guy of the Orlando Magic, the the new franchise in the NBA. And so David called me and said, Mick, he said, are you still interested in this job? I said, oh, yeah. He said, well, we've heard from just about everybody else. We haven't heard anything from you. We're just gauging your interest. I said, I'm very interested. You see, I'd been doing the NCAA tournament. That took me a couple of weeks. And then right after that, I left for Florida to go down to Tampa and Plant City to cover the Reds in spring training. I'd spend a couple of weeks down here covering the Reds for spring training. So I had about a month where my mind wasn't on my job. That's about the only time my mind wasn't on my next job. I was always thinking about my next job. And so that's why I really was preoccupied. I said, oh, sure. So they brought me down April 27th of 1989, and it was supposed to be just one day, and it went really well. And they kept me over a second day, and I flew out of the Cincinnati airport, which is in Covington, Kentucky. And I lived in Springboro, Ohio, halfway between Dayton and Cincinnati. Well, I flew out of Dayton. I flew out of Dayton, but the plane, there was some issue with the Dayton airport. They had to land us in Covington. So they put us all on a bus. This was about 1:30 or 2 o'clock in the morning. I was supposed to get back about 11 o'clock that night and then go to work the next day. And they put us on a bus, and I literally almost drove right by my house, about an hour and a half drive from Covington up to Dayton to get my car at Dayton Airport. I drove home. I got home about 2:30 in the morning. Told my wife about it. We stayed up. She had to teach school the next morning. So we talked until she said, I got to get to sleep. It's like 4 in the morning now. So she goes back to sleep. And she goes off to school about 7:30, 7:45, and I go back to bed because I'm doing the 6, 7, 11 o'clock nightly TV sports. And it was about 8 o'clock. I mean, I had just dozed off. I had just gotten to sleep. I was exhausted. And the phone rang. And this guy says, oh, he says, this is Coach Arnsbarger. He says, you want to be a Florida Gator? And I thought to myself, who, what? I go, and then I went, oh, Coach Arnsbarger, Coach, oh, yeah, oh, hey, oh, yeah, yes, sir. And that's how he offered me the job. I was the last one hired. And as soon as I'd only been home a matter of hours. He didn't know I'd just gotten home about 5-6 hours earlier. And that's how I got it. And then I came down here at the end of July. And it's been a great ride ever since, really is.
That's a great story. At Chris Doring Mortgage, they do mortgage lending right, helping home buyers throughout Gainesville and North Central Florida. Call Chris Doring Mortgage today at 352-244-0840. Our guest today on the Titan More Hotline is the voice of the Gators, Mick Hubert. Mick, so I believe you're the only broadcaster at a major university that has called a national championship win in football, baseball, and basketball. I mean, there's been so many great moments in your 30-plus years here. What's a couple that stand out?
Well, certainly there's been so many. I mean, there's been so many. I mean, as I mentioned, I was in that news conference here with Coach Kruger, and then in the news conference when Coach Spurrier got hired, and that was. That was pretty special right there. Little did I realize, I mean, I'd be lying to say I knew how it was going to go, but wow. I mean, I look back on it now and I think just what was about to happen to the University of Florida Gators, and from that spring that you played so well over in Jacksonville, we moved the spring game over there, and then to come out and I don't want to get into a memory war with you because I know you got a memory much better than me about your career and those things. But I remember that first game against Oklahoma State, and I think we scored in 5 plays, went 65 yards in 5 plays. I think it was 3 passes and 2 runs, but it was like bip, 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 and then we got in there and handed off and got a touchdown. It's like a minute and a half into the game, it's 7-0, and then we go out and hang 50 on them, and it just went. Everything was unbelievable. And so, we had all this great success. And then we get to the 95 season after several SEC championships before that point, as you know. And, and the thing, Nebraska just steamrolled us. But as I tell people, I said, you know what, we were ahead 10-6 after the first quarter. Wasn't like they smacked us from the opening kickoff. I mean, we were ahead after that first quarter. And then Tommy Frazier, I think he's still scoring touchdowns today. We couldn't stop him. And but that was our only loss of the year. And again, who knew that the following year we'd be back in the championship game? I was just so grateful to be in that place, at the stadium there in Tempe, call that game. Now, I had been in Omaha in 1991. Now, the Gator baseball team had been there in 1988, their first try out there. But I didn't come till after that. So my first baseball season was the spring of 1990. So in 1991, we're sitting there with a 11-11 record, and then we go 40-10 down the stretch, and we get 51 wins, and we go to Omaha. So I thought, wow. I remember in '91 thinking, I'm in Omaha, old Rosenblatt Stadium, and I'm pinching myself. I think I may never get back here. Well, so in '95 we lose that football game. In '96 we get back, and then of course we have to have a little bit of help with various teams along the way, and we get in that game, and we steamroll FSU, beat them 52-20. So that clearly is the number one memory that I have of winning the Gators' first ever national championship. Do it against an arch rival, and do it where you can enjoy the last 4, 5, 6 minutes. As a play-by-play guy, you're really honed in on every single play. But I remember doing those last whatever minutes of that game, knowing we are the national champions. But you got to keep playing. They're going to keep snapping the ball. So you got to keep calling the plays. But when the clock strikes 0, we're the champions. And so that was great. And then in '96, we'd also gone back to the College World Series and finished third in the nation. I'm thinking, wow, it's been 5 years since I've been here. I may never get back again. Well, in '98, Andy Lopez took us back there again. I'm thinking, wow, I've been to 2 national championship games in football, back-to-back, '95, '96. And then I've been to Omaha now, '91, '96, '98. I mean, this decade's unbelievable. I thought when the year 2000 came around, I thought we'll never have a decade like we just went through. Mick, you better understand that. You better realize the significance of the place in history you have just seen these 10 years. And I think I would say that I was wrong, because the next 10 years were greater than the first 10 years. And so, to go out there and the thing that I remember also, Shane, is in 2005, the College World Series had gone to a best-of-3 championship format for the 2 winners of each bracket. So here's Florida playing Texas, 2 out of 3 for the national championship of the College World Series. Now, the Longhorns beat us back-to-back. We never played the third game. But that was the start of what could have been an unbelievable moment. It was great as it was, but the win of football in '06 and '08, basketball '06, '07, it could have all been started by a baseball championship in '05. But for that, whatever that was, 24, 30 months or whatever it was, that collected, I don't know how I can separate all of that, because, I hate to kind of lump 4 national championships into one moment. But we'd be talking for days if I went in and all talked about all the stuff getting to those. But to be around, those guys, I'm talking basketball now, those old 4s and special personalities that they had, and around Coach Donovan, just tremendous friendship. And Shane, as I said, you had a great career, and then Danny Werfel comes along, and then he goes out and wins a Heisman. I remember thinking this too. Probably a lot of people thought, we'll never see another Danny Werfel. We'll never see that. And then lo and behold, a decade later, here comes along a Tim Tebow. And because the media had expanded so greatly, and everything was so much different in 06, 07 than it was 95, 96, he became a bigger star than a Danny Werfel. I'm thinking, I'm around 2 athletes like this, national champions groups, 2 Heisman Trophy winners. Then I'm around Horford, Noah, and Green, and all those guys. And now today I'm working basketball with Lee Humphrey. I'm going, my goodness, I'm just a small town kid from Illinois. I grew up in the cornfields, and now I'm getting to do this. And so and which is not to say that the last 10 years hasn't been good either, because we had that 2017 baseball championship game, and I'm working alongside Jeff Cardozo, who I remember coming in as a little snot-nosed freshman, 6'4", skinny. He must have weighed 140 pounds at 6'4", his freshman year, and then he was in Omaha as a player in that 1998 season that I referenced, and now I'm working alongside Jeff, and Jeff had a desire to be a broadcaster, and he would come to me, and I was happy to help him out and give him pointers and tips and do all that. Now working alongside one another. And in that 9th inning of that championship game, Jeff went down to the field to do the post-game interview. So I'm up there in that booth by myself doing the 9th inning. But before he left to go down, he and I, we really couldn't even look at one another. I mean, I'm almost tearing up right now. We couldn't look at each other because we were about to cry. It was hard for me to get words out of my mouth, and I threw it down to Jeff, and he was the same way, to realize that Florida's now won a baseball national championship after all these years. And then I knew also going into that series that would be my last year doing Gator baseball on the radio. I was going to go over just do television beginning in 2018. So that was the last radio broadcast I did of baseball, the national championship game. So that made 6. That made three footballs, 2 basketballs, and a baseball. And sit there and think 6 national championships as the voice of the Florida Gators. Like you said, no one's done it. And, I just thank God that I was the guy that got to do that all from a friend of mine, Bruce Asbury, back in Peoria and in Dayton, said, Mick, you need to send a tape. And I really was hesitant about sending a tape, thinking there's no way that they're going to hire me. And it turned out, that it worked out that way. And, I got the call, from Bill, and that also came because of my working with Homer Rice. He was the one that ended up calling Bill Arnsparger, as I mentioned a while back. And he said, Mick, I'll be happy to call Bill Arnsparger. I coach with him. I talk to him about every 6 weeks. We've been friends for years. I'll pick up the call and I'll tell him he needs to hire you. And that's kind of what happened. So it's been unbelievable, Shane. It really has.
Last thing for you, Mick. You don't really do baseball anymore, but back when you were doing it, you and Lee have a tremendous bond in the booth for football, whether it was Mark Wise or now Lee Humphrey doing basketball, and you and Jeff, or whether it's Steve Russell. What sport does Mick Hubert enjoy calling the most?
Yeah, that's a hard one to do. That's so hard, Shane, because, growing up in the Midwest, I loved all of them. I really did. You have distinct seasons. I mean, it snows. You have your winter. And growing up as a kid, I always thought, wouldn't it be great to do basketball in a place where it's 75 or 80 degrees? In other words, you come back from a road trip, like you did at Dayton or even at Bradley, you come back on a road trip, you get back at 1:30 in the morning, 2 o'clock at the airport. You hope, number one, your car starts. It's right. About 5 degrees. You got to scrape the windshield. You got to scrape the ice off. Hope the car starts. You got to drive home. It might be snow on the roads. Might be slick. I'm going, could I do basketball where I just come out of the gym and get in the car? And that's kind of what happened. I mean, so I love basketball. I love the football. I mean, again, growing up in the Midwest, I mean, every game to me, when I started doing some of these games, whether it was high school or Division III football, where there might have been 3,000 or 4,000 people in the stands, every game was Ohio State, Michigan. In terms of, that's my mindset. It may be Dayton versus Baldwin Wallace with 3,500 people in the stands, but to me, no, this is Ohio State and Michigan. I mean, really back in those days, it was a Big 2 to Little 8. That's what the Big 10 was. So I had that, and as I said, mentioned growing up listening to Cubs and the White Sox, I love baseball. I thought I'd be a baseball broadcaster. I'm glad I'm not. I mean, that's a terrible lifestyle to have to, do 162 games and exhibition games, 190 games. You're working every day. You're gone all the time. It would have been a miserable lifestyle. But when you're 10, 12 years old, you think, wow, that's the dream right there. So I got to do the sportscasting and like I said, football and basketball. I've been so blessed because I worked with Jeff, as you said, and I also work on TV with Nick Belmonte, former Gator. For every TV game I've done for 31 years on television of the Gators have been with Nick Belmonte. And he's working with the Cubs. He's a scout. And he knows baseball through and through. Forgot more than I'll ever know. And then Mark Wise, same way. I mean, great. Lee McGriff, I had 2 stints with him. He was there when I got there, and then he stepped away when the boys played, Travis and Britt, and then he came back, and I think he came back in 2003. So it's been over 20 years. So I've had over 20 years with Lee, over 20 years with Mark, over 30 years with Nick Belmonte, and that's what I said when I was so blessed that one day when I got that call from the Florida Sports Hall of Fame saying they were going to put me in there. And I said, well, it wouldn't be possible without those 3 guys. And of course, my wife, we went to high school together. So I've known her forever since we were teenagers. And so she knew what I was all about and what my dream was and all that. But to work alongside 3 guys or three and four pros, it makes your job so much easier. And I couldn't have asked for better broadcast partners. And I always like to say, and in wrapping up for what your question was, I always like to say, ask me what my favorite season is, because it's hard to define what my favorite sport is. But if you ask me my favorite season, I'll tell you it's the off season. Because, back when I was a little bit younger, I'd do over 100 games a year, from football and to basketball and to baseball. So I really love June and July. That's when I can get away. And I always told people, look, I don't live, eat, and breathe Gator football 52 weeks a year. Don't ask me about who we're recruiting. You know, 'cause I don't know. When they get on the depth chart, when they make the 3 deep chart, they'll get in my consciousness. But I don't know about them until they get here. I don't care to know about them. Likewise, don't ask me necessarily in March 25th, how are we looking out there at spring football? I got a 3-game series this weekend with Georgia in baseball. You know, I may even might be doing some NCAA basketball tournament. Football is so far from my mind right now. But I tell you what, when August comes around, I'll be, you're in it so deep in August that you don't know anything else. Like I'd be hard pressed right now to talk too much to you about basketball because it's so far removed from my mind. So that's kind of the way I've had to work it. I've enjoyed every season that I've been in when I'm in it because you get in it and that's what you're in. That's what makes November fun, but it makes it doubly difficult because over the years, basketball has started coming so much forward. They're playing basketball now, November 5th or 6th, and we still got four weeks of football to go. So I like November. I'm not complaining, but I just wish those things were spread out a little bit more in the same way as like in March. I'm loving doing baseball in March, but let's face it, it's March Madness. So you love doing that basketball. So I just don't. My dad was a factory worker, Shane. He worked in a factory after World War II. And he said, man, you got to realize they're paying you to go watch a sporting event. I mean, you're not a hard laborer. You need to be appreciative of what it is. And you've always wanted to do this. So, go at it full blast and make the most of it. And my folks had retired and moved to Lakeland, Florida for the first 5 years of my job as the voice of the Gators till he passed away. So he got to see me do the Gator stuff for 5 years. So I know he was pretty proud that I actually pursued my 7 or 8 year old dream and made it a profession. And I'm still been so blessed today to still be working it. I can't wait for the next game. I mean, I don't know when it's going to be. I hope it's September 5th, but I don't know. But I can't wait to do that next one, Shane.
Well, we appreciate you joining the show, and we're ready to hear you on a call in the swamp, no question about it. Mick, I can't thank you enough, and you've done a tremendous job here, and hopefully you'll be hanging around being the voice of the Gators for a long, long time.
Shane, thank you. Appreciate being on with you. Thank you again.
That's Mick Hubert, voice of the Gators. Join us. We're going to take our first time out of the program, and we'll be right back. You're watching and listening to Pod Up with Matthews in the Morning from the Crime Prevention Security System Studios. We'll be right back.
Time out! Time out! Hey! Time out! Time out! Time out! There we go. Good.
We want to take this moment to thank all our sponsors who keep the show going and pay the bills.
Let's give them something to cheer for now.
Our gridiron sponsors are Crime Prevention Security Systems, large enough to serve you, small enough to care. Titan MRI, Gainesville's only locally owned and operated MRI facility. Area Rug Masters, your #1 choice in Gainesville for all your area rug cleaning services. Meldon Law, where you matter most. Peachland Dental, Gator Nation's first choice for dentistry in Port Charlotte.
Bob in trouble, gets ready to throw, big hit.
Our touchdown sponsors are Campus USA Credit Union, Celebration Point Town Center, The Digital Mortgage Guide, Adams Ribs, Gator Dominoes, Celebrate Primary Care, Center State Bank, Gator Bait Media, Davis Gainesville Chevrolet, Miapa Latin Cafe, Gators Dockside, Aikido America Martial Arts and After School,
Doreen Weeby Realtor, Caldwell Banker, M.M. Parrish,
Radware, Style Cuts, Wrap Spot, Ironwood Golf Course, TB Financial, Chris Doring Mortgage, Meadowbrook Golf Course, Darshakow Insurance,
MB Listings,
and Pomodoro Cafe. If you are interested in promoting your business on this show, you can visit our website, podupwithshane.com, and click on the Advertise button or call Freddie at 352-284-3733. Again, thank you for all the great businesses that support this show. Please remember, if you like what we are doing here, thank our sponsors and support the businesses that support us.
He's looking, still looking. He's going for the end zone. He's got a touchdown.
Welcome back to a Monday edition of Pod Up with Matthews in the Morning from the Crime Prevention Security System Studios, large enough to serve you, small enough to care. Celebration points where the Gators come to celebrate with premium brands like Bass Pro Shop,
Starbucks, and Regal Cinemas. And coming soon, the HBC's new restaurant, Spurrier's Gridiron Grill and Visor's Rooftop Bar. We'll see you at Celebration Point. Really want to thank Mick Hubert. Mick can tell some stories. There's no question about it. But now we're going to switch gears and we're going to go to Orlando. We're joined by Orlando Sentinel writer Matt Murschel. Good morning, Matt. How are you?
Pretty good. How are you doing this morning?
Doing well, doing well. So, you cover pretty much college football nationally for the Orlando Sentinel. Things are changing daily. Where do we sit right now with college football, Matt?
Well, I think right now where we sit is, we're kind of playing a waiting game on 3 of the Power 5 conferences. We're waiting here from the ACC, SEC, and Big 12, sort of kind of to decide what they're going to do over the fall. They're supposed to meet this week. I think the ACC meets on Wednesday. SEC is supposed to get together on Thursday, and they're going to discuss what's going to happen this fall. Are they going to continue to kind of move forward with this idea of playing a full schedule, 12-game schedule? Are they going to maybe tweak that schedule, maybe to go, 11 plus 1, 10 conference games, 1 non-conference? Will they go 10 plus 2? They're probably going to discuss all these models, and they're going to discuss when they want to kick things off. And some of that kind of goes back to, what happened with the Big Ten and the Pac-12 deciding to go conference only a couple weeks ago. I think the rest of the Power 5 wanted to have extra time. They wanted to see kind of what's going on in the country and be able to make a decision. So that's where we kind of stand right now. Everyone else, the Group of 5 conferences, the American and CUSA, they're all waiting to kind of see what the big boys do. But once a decision is either made this week or we're told maybe possibly that, they're going to wait a couple more weeks, then we can kind of move forward with what's going to happen in the fall.
Do you think the SEC, the ACC, and the Big 12 are going to stick to what the other Power 5 conferences did with just conference-only games?
No, I don't. I think the reason why they've been waiting and the reason why they have these 3 is I think they really want to go forward. They like that kind of cross-conference matchups, the Florida State game. They love that game. They don't want to see that game go away. I think they're working really hard to keep those happening. I know not all the ACC and SEC have those games, but I think with sitting down with these 3 conferences, I think they're trying to come up with some sort of universal testing protocol that they feel like all 3 of these conferences are going to be able to do. And that way, then they can find a way to play these games. I really think it isn't going to be the regular season. It isn't going to be like a 12-game season like we've seen in the past. I think it's probably going to be this 11 plus or a 10 plus 1 model, which is, that 1 non-conference game. So they get that in there. That way, then they can, if everyone has the same protocol, they can trust each other when they go and play each other. I think that's the concern the Big Ten had with the Mid-American Conference. A lot of its non-conference opponents was they just weren't sure what kind of testing was going to be like. And in some cases, it's justified. The Group of 5 schools can't afford the amount of testing that the Power 5 schools can do right now. So I think that's what's you're gonna probably see happen, and you'll probably see the season get pushed back a little bit. I still feel like no one's comfortable trying to kick things off on Labor Day weekend. They would like to have a couple extra weeks to kind of make sure everything's in good shape. Look what happened this past weekend. We saw Michigan State and Rutgers both basically shut down their programs and quarantine the whole team. So I still feel like we're still a couple of ways away from everything really kind of going off the way they would like to have it. So that's the direction I feel like things are going to go over the next couple of weeks.
We're speaking with Matt Murschel on the Titan MRI hotline. You can follow him on Twitter at OS Matt Murschel. Matt, you're down in Orlando, so obviously you follow UCF football. And I've had many people on my show in the last month or so. Everybody wants to kind of, I don't want to say do away with the mid-major type schools, the Group of 5, but, South Alabama, and I'm using them for an example because they were supposed to come to the Swamp this year. Good football program here and there, got some good players. Their dreams were to play SEC type football. So they have an opportunity to come play a game in the Swamp. Probably won't happen. But how are those type of schools in UCF, they've gone to Nebraska, they've gone and played big boy football because they get that paycheck. It helps support their football program. How are these type of schools going to survive if they don't get the big payday game?
That's a good question. I think a lot of the schools right now, you're seeing this across the board, trying to make drastic cuts, in some cases, trying to cut their athletic budgets. UCF announced, last week that they're going to that their athletic teams are going to cut their budgets by 10%. That's just a first, I guess, step in a way. I think a lot of that was made because they're trying to avoid, laying off staff and making cuts to other programs. That's what we're seeing at some places, especially the Mid-American Conference, for instance. They've started slashing actual teams. They've cut some baseball teams. They're cutting cross country. They're cutting some sports like that. Teams like, places like UCF want to avoid that. They want to see if they can get away with that. I think they're in a little different scenario maybe than like a South Alabama, like you mentioned, because I think UCF's done a good job of, fundraising. I think you look at what Danny White's done, and then they're trying to do that now. They're asking fans and donors to give money to help the athletic department, during these tough times. South Alabama's a little different. Again, they count on these big games. They counted on that Florida game. They wanted to have that game so they could, add a little bit more money to their budget and keep things moving forward. They were planning on that game. Now not to have that, it's going to be huge. I think, that's where there's going to be some questions, whether or not, do the conferences like the Power Five, do they provide a little bit of money to some of these schools they were supposed to be playing anyways and could now if they change their scheduling policy. So if that happens, that can help out. If not, I think some of these schools may have to look for federal funding. I mean, they're maybe looking to the government to try to help themselves out. I think and everything is going to be on the table right now because they're just aren't going to be able to survive. That money was a huge part of their athletic budget, and to not have that, really kind of hurts things. And you're going to see this more and more in the next couple of weeks, whether schools are going to try in creative ways to figure out how to keep that money from being an issue. We saw Arizona State. I know they're not in that kind of level, but announced yesterday that they're basically going to redshirt their entire swimming and diving program for a year. So that way they can kind of, save some of the money that's going to be spent to those programs. I think ADs are going to try to find every way possible. Schools like South Alabama's, maybe a little bit of UCF at some point, they're going to have to figure out different ways to kind of make that money work because tickets drive a lot of the budget. Sponsorship drives a lot of the budget, and there's those TV deals. And if the season is somehow either truncated or not maybe feature some of those prime games that they're used to having, that's going to impact their TV deals as well. So this is a really tenuous time for a lot of athletic directors I've spoken with who said, everything, we're just hoping that we can move forward. That's why I think you're seeing such a push to get college football being played, is they know that how much that money really kind of impacts some of these programs.
The Chick-fil-A Classic or whatever it's called, they have a couple of preseason games. They have not canceled those. Are you a little surprised at that, or is it all a money deal?
I think it's all money. I wasn't so much surprised. I think they're trying to be very optimistic, so to speak. I think they feel like if they continue to be that way, maybe something will happen. I think they could still get those games played at some point. The one biggest factor I took away from talking with, Gary Slokin from the Chick-fil-A Bowls was that if they don't have any fans, if they have less than, 25% of capacity, they can't play those games. I mean, those games are really kind of driven on, the ticket sales and the sponsorships. So if they don't have those games, if they can't get people in the stands, then those games aren't going to happen no matter what. Which in that case, they may lose some games anyways. Like I said, if they go with the 11 game schedule, with a 10+1, for instance, Florida State's not playing West Virginia. They're gonna take that not conference game and they're gonna go play Florida. So that game goes away. Georgia's gonna go play Georgia Tech. They're not gonna play Virginia. So they may be able to piece together a game, maybe taking West Virginia and Virginia, put them together. But Auburn, North Carolina, for instance, that's going to be the big game. That's the game that North Carolina is probably going to take, which is unfortunate for, as we mentioned, UCF, because UCF had them on their schedule as their opener. So that's where we're seeing some of this play out. I think that's going to be the big question is, can they do this with fans? Can they, with everything going on, can they get fans in the stands? Can they do it safely? We've seen a little bit of it, here and there, some areas, but, Major League Baseball or MLS soccer and NBA, for instance, hasn't done it with fans yet down here in the bubble in Orlando. So it's going to be interesting whether they can find ways to do it and do it safely.
We got a question for you here on Facebook Live, brought to you by Meldon Law, where you matter most. Jeff wants to know, I wonder if the smaller schools have insurance coverage if the big payday game doesn't happen for whatever reason. I think Wimbledon, they canceled Wimbledon this year, but they had some kind of policy that paid them a ton of money. Are you familiar with that at all? If any of the smaller schools have an insurance policy?
I do know that some do have that. They put themselves in some sort of situation to make sure if that were to happen. Obviously, for instance, if a hurricane comes through, which is what happened our state, last couple of years, some games have been canceled or move around. There is some insurance that can help out with that. But I don't know if that necessarily would cover the entire cost of what they were looking at. Again, ticket sales are a huge amount of it. And I think for the schools themselves where the games are being at, we're going to help out. For South Alabama, for instance, they were going to Florida. So it's not, I think they may get the payday, so to speak, but they would miss out a little bit on anything else extra. So again, I think insurance can step up and help out. I think some of the conferences might do this. I mean, I've talked to some conference commissioners who said, listen, we'll do whatever we can to try to help out. In some cases, if not, they're going to reschedule some of these games. They'll put them down the road and try to get them in there as maybe try to work out some deal to help out, like a home and home or something, or another, home game down the road. So I think there's ways to kind of help this out a little bit, but let's not forget all these conferences are hurting. As much as the Power Five had lots more money, they're not going to be opening up the checkbook anytime soon to give too much money out there. But I think conferences will try to help out as much as they can as well to make sure these teams don't suffer too much.
Matt, would this be the year if we do play and, whatever they figure out with the scheduling, is this the year that they tweak the playoff system? This may be a great year to say, okay, all the conference champs from the Power Five schools get in the playoffs, and then maybe an at-large team or maybe, a couple extra at-large teams. Could this be the year they do that, or are they going to stick with the four?
Well, as of right now, they've indicated they're going to stick with the four. But, I think that could change very much. So I agree. I think that this could be a one-time thing where maybe they expand to 8 or maybe they go, to 12, where every conference champion, gets a team in. Because, again, like you said, this is an unusual situation. Some of the Big Ten and the Pac-12 are going to go conference-only games without having those non-conference matchups. How is that going to impact who gets into the playoff? If the ACC, SEC, Big 12 try to do something differently and how their schedules are set up, how is that going to impact everything? We know the SEC is probably the strongest conference out there. They're probably going to get a team in or two. I think the Power Fives want to see them get a chance, an opportunity. So I think there could be a chance this year they tweak it. And I think it would be a one-time thing until their contract is up in 2026, I think is when it goes out. And this would allow maybe the conference commissioners to kind of see what would happen in this situation, what would it look like, maybe give them a little preview of maybe how they want to tweak things down the road. And that way then, they could see what happens. And I think it would be an issue too also where I wouldn't be shocked if they did that if it was a home site type situation, not doing the bowl matchup so much so, because again, you don't want to have these teams traveling all over the country 2 or 3 times. You would like to keep that kind of bubble in your own kind of limited. So I think that's a very likely possibility. And let's not forget that the playoff is the management group of the playoff is comprised of the conference commissioners. So they will be able to make this decision. And that decision could come from them when they decide, listen, we want to make sure all our teams get an opportunity to play for a playoff spot. And I think that would be most likely be a year to kind of let's see what happens and expand it.
Last thing for you, Matt, and we didn't have much time because Mick told some great stories earlier. We couldn't get him off the line, but Florida Gators, a lot of people think they have a chance to make a run this year. Your thoughts on the Gators?
Well, I very much see that. I mean, I could see Florida, winning the East this year. I think Dan Mullen's done a great job with this team, with the recruiting, the development we saw last year towards the end. I think a lot of it kind of falls on Kyle Trask's shoulders a little bit. Again, he had an opportunity to step up last year at the end and really showcase what he's able to do. Now he's had more opportunities. Again, getting in practice, being able to get with his receivers, I think are going to be crucial, especially with everything going on with quarantining. I think he can kind of continue to show that leadership, and he's shown that leadership, on these teleconference calls, with his players. I think they have the opportunity, they have the talent to do this, especially when you look at Georgia and the fact that they've got some questions at quarterback, some new faces, and they're going to have some new faces on the offense all the way down. So this is an opportunity for Florida to make a big showing and to possibly get into the SEC championship game.
Great stuff, Matt. Let everybody know how they can check out. You have a podcast as well. Let everybody know how they can listen.
Yeah, the College Gridiron 365 podcast. You can listen to it anywhere you get podcasting needs. And then you can follow me on Twitter, OS Matt Murschel.
Good stuff, my man. Stay safe. We'll talk to you soon down the road.
All right. Thank you a lot. Stay safe.
That's Matt Murschel from the Orlando Sentinel. Join us. Today's show is going to be a wrap, folks, brought to you by Wrap Spot. We really want to thank Matt Murschel from Orlando Sentinel and
the voice of the Gators, Mick Hubert, for joining us. Tomorrow's show, you got Buddy Martin from the Buddy Martin Show, and also we'll be joined by former Gator kicker Caleb Sturgis. Be safe out there, folks. We'll see you tomorrow. Take care.